Just look at all those delectable rocks sprinkled on those mountains. Mighty tasty. Yeah! All right. So what was I saying?
Oi, we're on in the mud here. I'm going to do another reading, a new book called The Blind Colt. The camera and the video are not working together. I have it as low as I can so I can just hear it and you can just barely hear me. So I'm hoping that this time there's at least a happy little balance. So today I'm going to read 20 minutes or so. Well, it's 19, I think so. The Blind Colt. So I hope everyone has the gravel or ate the gravel. If you not, go get your drink, go get your gravel, come back, sit down, and enjoy the reading. Let's roll into The Blind Colt. The Badlands. It was near sundown of an early spring afternoon when the brown Mustang mare left the wild horse band where it was grazing on the new spring grass and climbing carefully to the top of a nearby hogback. All afternoon she had been restless and nervous, spending much of her time on high ground watching the countryside around her. Now she stood and stamped her feet fretfully while she tipped her sharp-pointed ears forward and back as she looked and listened. Her nostrils flared wide as she tested the wind for any smells that might be around. The rain-gilded butts, B-U-T-T-E-S, and pinnacles of the Badlands threw long black shadows across the soft gray and brown and green of the alkali. Oh God, here we go. Right off the bat. Oh, of course, I gotta wait. Alkali. Flats below her. A few jackrabbits had already left their hiding places and were prospecting timidly around in the open, searching out tender shoots of new grass. They too threw long black shadows that were all out of proportion to their size. A few bull bats boomed overhead and a meadowlark sang in the top of the sagebrush nearby. Below her, the rest of the Mustang band grazed quietly except for an occasional squeal and thump of hooves as some minor dispute was settled. Otherwise, everything was quiet. But still, the little mare didn't leave the ridge. She stood watching while the flats grew darker and the darkness crept up the sides of the butts. Until at last the sun touched only the very tip-tops of the highest pinnacles. Then after a look back to where the rest of the horses were bedding down for the night, she slipped quietly to the far side of the ridge and soon hidden in the darkness. Next morning she was in a grassy hollow at the head of a dry coulee where the rolling prairie and the Badlands met. And lying at her feet, sound asleep, was her colt that had been born during the night. The early sun touched the tops of the rim rock behind her, then gradually crept down into was the warming grass where the little Mustang lay. As soon as the ground had begun to steam and the touch of frost was out of the air, she nudged him with her muzzle and waked him up. For a little while he lay there sniffing around in the grass as far as he could reach, and flipping his tail to hear it thump against the ground, while the mare stood relaxed on 3 legs and watched him. But after a while she seemed to figure out it was time for him to get up and about, so she urged him to his feet. He was an awkward-looking scrap as you'd care to see, as he stood with his long knobbly legs raised wide apart and caught his breath after the effort of getting up. Sounds like me in the morning. His body was close-knit and compact, and his back was flat and strong. His muzzle was delicately shaped, but his forehead bulged as a colt's do. His neck was so short that he couldn't get his nose closer to the ground than to his knees, and his legs were so long he seemed to be walking on stilts. His ears were trim and sharply pointed, but looked as though they should be long as a horse much larger than he. The mare saw it was all, but she knew that the colts were to put together so, and that those extra long legs of his were especially made that way so that by the time that he was dry and a day or 2 old, he would be able to travel as far as the grown horses in case of danger. And besides, she thought that his blue-eyed colt was especially handsome. For a few minutes, the colt was busy trying to balance himself on his legs while he sniffed and snorted at everything in reach. As soon as he stood still, he was all right, but then he tried walking and found he was engaged in a mighty ticklish business. What with his being so high in the air with nothing holding him up but those 4 knobby knees and legs. They had been lifted and swung just so, or they got all tangled up and started him kicking off in some extremely unexpected direction. Typical pony. But he was hungry, and the only way he could get anything to eat was to go after it himself. So it wasn't long before he was able to scramble around against the mare's side. After a little nuzzling around, he found her teats and settled down to sucking noisily, flapping his tail in the excitement. Before long, his sides began to stick out. He was so full of milk that he was quite ready to enjoy the business of having his coat groomed by the Mustang mare. She was brushing with pride. It was as this was her first colt. She whickered softly and carried. She cared for him. With her muzzle every now and then. Go away. As she stumbled, scrubbed him with her rough tongue. I didn't think a horse's tongue was rough. I never thought my horse didn't have a rough tongue. Then she hit a ticklish spot. He'd flip his tail and squirm and snort in his tiny little nostrils. When he did that, she nipped him gently with her big yellow teeth and warned him that wild ones must learn to obey and he'd better stand.
Let those other champions know. They better eat their
Oh, my
gravel if they
alarm.
want to keep up with Daruk.
All right, Drook, go away. Thank you for telling me it's 8 o'clock. And that he better stand still until she was done, or he might get worse. And not an inch of his body did she overlook. The white snip on his nose, his speckled blue sides and flanks. His legs that shaded down black shiny hooves. All got their share of combing and washing. By the time he had been thoroughly polished, the sun was warm in the hollow, and he practiced his walking again, and his smelling and his hearing. He started taking little exploration trips, a few wobbly steps in one direction and then another, with much sniffing and snorting as the brittle last year's grass cracked underfoot. As he got the hang of the operation of his legs, walking apparatuses more smoothly, he became bolder and excited the range of his explorations until sometimes he traveled as far as 10 or 20 feet from the brown mare's side. His black-tipped, pointed ears were turned in all directions to help him locate the source of sounds that he heard. He pointed them forward and then back to the soft winds and that spring up on the desert in the morning brushed against them, feeling sweet and clear and smooth. What few sounds he heard at first seemed to float separately through the warm silence as though they were all the same in the world and no need for two noises to be moving at the same time. Meadow larks whistled from nearby sagebrush, and far off he could hear the harsh bickering of magpies as they quarreled over a dead rabbit or a gopher. Later on, he discovered that down close to the ground where his sin was a thin blanket of bug sounds, flies buzzing, the grasshoppers whirling, and barrier beetles made clicking noises as they rustily buried a small dead snake. Sniffing through his nose, he caught a sharp, clean smell of sagebrush and the more pungent smell of green greasewood as the sun began to heat it up. Occasionally he got a whiff of wild plume and chokeberry blossoms from the thick down below the rim of the Badlands. Of course, these were the big plain smells discovered. Lately on, he would learn to identify others that he had to be searched for with flared nostrils. Oh my God, I can't read. Later he would learn to identify others that he had to be searched for with flared nostrils and carefully and directed sniffed for the story they could tell him of his friends or danger or the location of water holes in the dry times. But for now, the simpler lessons were enough to keep him busy, and the Mustang mare was mighty proud of him. Before a while, her pride, she was a little troubled too. For there was something strange about the colt. Although she couldn't tell exactly what the matter was, he was lively as you would expect in a colt, only a few hours old to be. He snorted, kicked up his heels when a ground squirrel whistled close by. Okay, they whistled. And when the timberweed blew against his legs, he would put on a mock battle, rearing up and lashing out with his front feet. When he came back to her from his trips, he pinched her with his teeth and pretended to fight as any healthy colt should. But nonetheless, she felt that something was wrong. The sun climbed higher, and the colt finally tired himself out and laid down to doze at the mare's feet. She thought about starting back to join the Mustang band, but it seemed so safe and peaceful here in the pocket that she hated to leave. By tomorrow, the colt's legs would be stronger, and he would be able to follow her with no difficulty. But before the morning was half gone, she heard the sound of danger, an iron-shod hoof striking a stone, and looked up to see two cowboys between her and the mouth of the pocket, as it was Uncle Trawler and Whitey. All right, there's Rudania. Yep, there's Rudania. That gives me a minute or two. Out to see how their range stock was getting along. Tyler was a slow-speaking fellow with a droopy red mustache, and a good many of the horses running in the Badlands belonged to him. Whitey, who was possibly 10 years old or thereabouts, had lived with him on the ranch for several years, almost since he could remember. He wore a cast-off Stetson hat of polished, high-heeled riding boots from the same source. Okay, just making sure the video was doing what it was supposed to do. Sorry, guys. They lived alone like any two old sourdoughs, and were a familiar sight at all the roundups and in town of a Saturday. Traro on a crop-eared black and Whitey on top of a pot-belly old pinto named Spot. Hey, all right, there's my pebbles. All right, so we're going to stop there. It's telling me that I need to sign off, so it's been good to see and hear everyone. You see or hear me. Good night, everyone. Gone in the Mud signing off. Hope you guys roll in for the next reading. Talk to you all later. Gone in the Mud rolling out. Good night, everyone.